Thanks for listening. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one coaching with Dr. Lodhi, please visit drsadaf.com. I am an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and this episode is everything you need to know about breastfeeding, postpartum, and intimacy issues afterwards. Before we get into it, the first thing I want to make very clear is that I am not giving any type of religious or medical advice. So if you have any concerns about your health, please speak with your medical provider. And if you have any questions about your religion, please ask your friendly neighborhood religious leader. It's the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman who talks about sex. And also, before we get into the episode, I just want the viewers and the listeners to know that I have a retreat coming up in May 19th through the 21st. So make sure you go on my link in my bio and check it out. It'll be awesome. I have a nutritionist as well that's coming in. So that's going to be great. And also I have a free download on my link also on Beacons, which is on my Instagram as well as my TikTok. So feel free to go check that out and make sure you get your copy of the free download. And now we are all ready to start our podcast. And please welcome Dr. Andrea Wadley. It's so nice to have you here, Dr. Wadley.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. My name is Andrea Wadley. Like you said, I'm a pediatrician. I'm also trained in lactation consulting and do breastfeeding medicine. So what that means is I have the doctoring side of things and the lactation side of things, so I can solve a lot of problems for moms in the community who are breastfeeding. So I have a small boutique type home visit practice here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. As well as I offer online breastfeeding medicine education, and am launching a breastfeeding medicine center where moms can go to find all of the information that they need to support them during this time of their life.
That is amazing. That is so sorely needed. I mean, I wish we could clone that in every single city and town in the US and all over the world. I mean, so many women could use your help and also help with all of the questions that they have after breastfeeding and after delivery, and the fact that you're a pediatrician, they can ask you all the questions about their babies. I mean, I think that what you are doing is absolutely amazing. And especially the postpartum period where you can barely even get out of bed, let alone brush your teeth. And then you got this little kid, sitting there crying and screaming, and you're trying not to have a meltdown. I mean, gosh, to have a pediatrician who knows breastfeeding and can take care of the baby and tell me what's going on is just an amazing, amazing combo. So tell me more.
So I had started this practice about 5 years ago now, actually. Prior to that, I was a newborn hospital doctor. So I helped moms, during the first 2 days after life, and then we would send the baby on, right, to their outpatient pediatrician. And during those years, I noticed that lots of moms think that they know so much about breastfeeding, that it's going to be easy, that it's not going to be a big deal, that they didn't need to prepare. And then they would get to the place, during the first few hours after delivery when they were exhausted and they were trying to process all this information that we were giving them, as well as worrying about the baby actually eating. So it was a really stressful time. So I emphasize, making sure that you're educating yourself ahead of time, which is why I started the Breastfeeding Education Center, so that you can take some classes, that you can connect with other providers that are in the postpartum realm, so that you can know kind of what to expect in order to do these things early. So a lot of what breastfeeding success involves is making sure you know what to do early on. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I'm curious to find out, so what are the typical issues that somebody comes across when they are nursing And then, we can also talk a little bit later about the intimacy issues that come
Mhm.
about with breastfeeding and postpartum moms and all that stuff. But what are the common issues that you see for somebody that's newly breastfeeding?
So usually first time moms just it just feels really overwhelming. And even myself, even as a pediatrician, I breastfed my daughter 10 years ago when she was born, almost 10 years ago now. And I thought I knew all the things, but I knew nothing, right? I had this little
Yeah,
tiny baby
yeah.
and she was extremely jaundiced. And then I was feeding her all the time and she wasn't gaining weight. I had no idea what was going on.
Mm.
So a lot of it is just overwhelming, and there's so much self doubt. Even when you're doing things well, you are always questioning. Whether the baby's getting enough breast milk, how can you measure the breast milk? Why am I feeling these certain feelings, experiencing these symptoms, and what can I do about them? So just a lot of things that we do to support moms postpartum, which we don't do a great job of that in this country. So I'm working to change that one little tiny house call at a time. So, yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's so many questions that come about when you start breastfeeding, with latching and all of those things. But, I think that a lot of my patients or a lot of our viewers and listeners are really probably interested in, intimacy issues and relationship issues that come about in breastfeeding moms and postpartum and things like that. So, have you noticed or have your patients talk to you about any of those type of issues that come about while they're nursing?
Yeah, so generally people don't talk about these things,
I
right? Which
know,
is
right?
I'm glad that you have this podcast so that we can talk about these things and make it more normalized for people. So, really based on my own experience, thinking about the things that happen to your body postpartum, you work so hard in the beginning to breastfeed, your body has changed a whole lot. You're just very much in survival mode. And then you see your OB at 6 weeks postpartum, if you've had a vaginal delivery. And that visit is great, but then they, often say, okay, great, you're clear. And what
Yep.
does that mean? You go home and your husband's excited about that, but are you really ready? Are you excited about those things? So, just the postpartum changes, they do a lot to your body and your mental health and your desire for things like that. Um,
Absolutely.
during that period of time, yes.
Yeah. So, being an OBGYN, where you and I are at the opposite ends, right? There's the
Mhm.
pregnancy and then you're the pediatrician. But absolutely. So when I have a lot of patients that come back to me postpartum, and oftentimes what they'll notice is vaginal dryness, they may have decreased libido, decreased arousal, and they oftentimes will experience pain after having had a baby. And the reason for that is that the hormones in the body, as you are well aware, but mainly for our listeners, is that, they all go down once you deliver that baby. So the estrogen, the progesterone, they go down, they fall right away, so that the other hormone, we know, oxytocin, which allows that milk to come into the breast and is actually the hormone responsible for that bonding that is necessary between the mom and the baby. And that hormone also allows that milk to come into that breast. And so, with all of these hormone fluctuations, I'm sure you probably see that as well with the breastfeeding consultations that you do. But, the moms can be definitely overwhelmed, but with so much going on in their body and also externally with now having to take care of a newborn, that, it's no surprise that women will have decreased libido, right?
Mhm.
So, when they
Correct.
have so many things on their plate, multiple studies have shown that it that libido, that arousal is absolutely going to be affected. So when a woman has intercourse for the first time after a delivery, she's going to have a lot of times she'll have that vaginal dryness, right? She's going to have perhaps a hard time getting aroused, perhaps a hard time finding that desire, because she's just overwhelmed. And that stress that happens to our bodies affects everything and definitely affects desire, and it affects our libido. And so, we just have to be really aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like you said, all of those hormones involved in breastfeeding suppress all those other things. So, when your estrogen is low, you have night sweats, which was extremely surprising to me. You have vaginal dryness, you have lack of desire, and then your breasts are just full of milk. So, how do you navigate that when you're trying to be intimate? Plus, being just exhausted and overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
it just kind of becomes another thing on your to-do list. So,
Yeah.
all of that is pretty normal, experiencing those things for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I don't know if you've heard of Emily Nagoski. She has that book Come As You Are, and she talks a lot about the brakes and the accelerators. And she talks about, things that cause breaks in a relationship, and when you're trying to find that intimate time, that physical connection with your partner. And definitely having a newborn, being exhausted, having so many things on your plate will absolutely affect the breaks in a relationship and in your body, so that you'll have a hard time getting aroused. You'll have a hard time feeling that desire to get that female sexual response going. And so all of those things will affect it. Oftentimes what I find is helpful for patients is to, have date nights, right? And so I don't know what you tell your patients about those that are trying to rekindle that relationship while they're breastfeeding and nursing. What advice do you offer them?
Yeah, so, by the time you get to the evening and you're exhausted, your spouse has maybe worked all day, you've taken care of the baby all day, maybe you have other kids and you've been doing all those things, you're exhausted, you're tired, right? So, date nights are wonderful. You can get a babysitter, have a date night. It's also okay to take advantage of nap times. So like on a weekend, if your baby is napping, that is a perfect time to, have some intimate time with your husband. And, it doesn't have to be necessarily sex, but it can be, time alone and
Yeah.
time together and focusing on each other instead of, worrying about the things of parenthood. And then, because of the way the hormones are behaving in your body and causing symptoms, things like lubricant or vaginal estrogen is something you could bring up with your OB-GYN. So in the early days of breastfeeding, when your estrogen is just so low that all of those things are dry and painful, some of those additional support during that time will help you. And then as your estrogen starts to come back to normal, your baby's getting older, you're tired and busy, and just making sure that you're making time for that to be a priority in your relationship with your spouse or your significant other.
I'm so happy that you bring that up in terms of intimacy, right? And what you just said is that it doesn't necessarily have to be physical. You can definitely have physical intimacy, but there are other forms of intimacy. You can have emotional intimacy, you can have intellectual intimacy, and you can have like spiritual intimacy, right? So just the word itself, intimacy, is just a togetherness, a sense of closeness that you have with another person, right? So physical intimacy is just one part of it, but there's so many others. And like you said, you can do so many other things. You can cuddle, you can hold hands, you can just spend time together without thinking about other people, and just focus on the other person, right? That a lot of that has to do with mindfulness. And so many studies have shown that when we are mindful and just really focused on the present moment and what you're doing in that moment without judgment, that increases not only arousal and desire, but it also increases the intimacy that you feel with your partner. And I'm also so glad that you brought up the point of lubricants, right? Lubricants, women should know that there's absolutely no shame in using a lubricant, right? That is what so many women in the world need and use to help moisturize and make the friction less during intercourse. And especially during that postpartum period when you have a lot of vaginal dryness due to, right, what we just talked about with the hormones going down and the breastfeeding, that you need that lubrication, and it's okay, and it absolutely should be normalized. So I'm so glad you bring up those 2 points about intimacy and lubrication.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other things that women come to you for in terms of, when you see them postpartum?
Well, so in my practice now, usually I get calls for women who need help with breastfeeding.
Yes.
And often that is, they're not sure the baby's getting enough. The pediatrician's worried about the baby's weight,
Mhm.
or the mom is having pain. Those are usually the two main things that people call me for is pain with latch or that the baby's not gaining like we're hoping and expecting. So.
Mhm, mhm. And so how are those video consults that you do? Are they, the mom is able to show you how the baby's latching on, and then you just guide her then online?
Yeah, so I'm able to do some video consults, but mostly I do in-person consults. So usually what we do is we weigh the baby first, naked without anything, right when I get there, and then we try our best to time the consult with a feeding time for the baby. It doesn't always work out perfect, and then I observe the mom, put the baby to breast, and see what she's doing, and see if I can offer some pointers to help her do things differently. Or if the baby won't latch, I show her some tricks and tips, and we kind of do that. And then I observe the whole feeding, and teaching the mom about breastfeeding and latch and all of those things while I'm observing the baby feed. And then afterwards, we weigh the baby, and that gives us a rough estimate of how much milk the baby is transferring from the breast. And then afterwards, I write up a whole note with a plan of action, and then I'm available to the mom for a couple of weeks via text if she has any other questions. And then we can always do a follow up video visit, or another in-person visit if needed. And then I communicate with their pediatrician, their family doctor, OB, or whoever had sent them to me, to make sure that the mom is getting well cared for in every aspect of breastfeeding and postpartum. So.
Sure, sure. Well, that sounds awesome. I'm so glad you have that service. I absolutely agree that it's important, especially for women that want to breastfeed, right? So, some women are not able to breastfeed, and there are other women that are and love it. And so, I am so glad that they have that support in you where you're able to guide them and also show them proper latch. I just had a patient to actually the other day that came to the office, and her nipples were all cracked because of the improper latch, right? And she couldn't figure out why the baby wasn't gaining weight. It's because the baby's not latching and not getting enough milk. And even though she had so much milk, it's just the whole process of it was just not working. And so, I told her to go, because unfortunately I'm not certified in lactation, but not that you even have to be certified. To be honest, I haven't really, done breastfeeding with a patient in a long time. And so I just felt that she would probably be better served, going to the hospital and seeing a lactation consultant who could then properly fix her latch, and so that the baby could get the milk that it needed to gain weight.
Yeah, and without her having pain too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because her
Yeah.
nipples were all cracked and bleeding and things like that. So absolutely. I think something else that you bring up, which is very important, is body image, right? So you had mentioned that, so many things change postpartum. You have a woman that, is lactating, and then her body's changed from the pregnancy. And so there's so many things that come with that, right? And there's self-esteem, and there's oftentimes when women may be intimate with their partners, they may be spectating, which is just kind of, not really in their own body, but just kind of watching themselves from outside of their body. And so I think that to help with that, women would need to kind of work on their thoughts. And I'm wondering if, you've noticed that with the women that come in that you deal with.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of intimacy starts in our brains, right? So, thinking through what your body looks like, what it feels like, what sort of things that you're worried about, and discussing that with your significant other. So, if you're intimate and having sex with someone, you should be able to also discuss, how things are making you feel, the parts of your body that you're not excited about, and being able to have an open communication about those things, especially during breastfeeding when, hormones and oxytocin is released also during, orgasm and those kinds of moments. And so milk can leak, and just it can feel awkward if you haven't discussed that, prior to those things. So just having open communication, I think, with your partner is the best thing to do, and the best way to enjoy intimacy in any shape or form of your body, postpartum or not. So
Absolutely. And I'm so glad again that you bring that up about communication, right? So that is actually one of the leading things that somebody can do to increase emotional intimacy and intimacy in general with their partner is open communication. And there is a screening tool. It's called the female sexual satisfaction tool. And practitioners can use that, and those that are in sexual medicine do use that to see how satisfied women are in their relationship. And they've noticed that the number one factor in determining whether a woman is sexually satisfied in her relationship is how well her communication is. So what you just stated about, speaking with your partner, being honest, right? And it's hard to be vulnerable, but when you're able to be vulnerable, it only increases that togetherness and that love and that connection that you have with your partner. So I think that communication is absolutely important, and especially at a critical time when, you're postpartum, you have all these hormones all over the place, you're trying to figure out how you feel and what's going on with that baby. And so when you're able to discuss how you feel and what your thoughts are, I think that really helps connecting with your partner.
yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how are some ways that people can get in touch with you? People are listening to this podcast, and I'm so grateful for the downloads that we've had. We've had around 40,000 downloads, and people are
Awesome.
listening all over the world. So, if somebody was interested in you, but they weren't local, how do you do those consultations? How could they get in touch with you?
Yeah, awesome. So I have a very local practice. I do all home visits. So if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you can look me up on my website, 127pediatrics.com. I have a pediatric practice where I do a membership and see kids like almost like a concierge type model. And then as well, I do breastfeeding medicine consults outside of the regular membership practice. So I can do one-off visits. I see a lot of physician moms in Dallas and Fort Worth. I can also do tongue tie releases, which is great because usually physicians are looking for someone with knowledge in that. But so 127pediatrics.com. I'm also on Instagram. And then if you're outside of Texas or even outside the Dallas-Fort Worth area and you're looking for breastfeeding support, I have a new breastfeeding medicine center that I'm launching online. So it's breastfeeding.127pediatrics.com. And then you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, all of those places, at the same address, 127 Pediatrics. So.
Awesome. Awesome. And so before we go, I'm wondering if you have any tips for new moms regarding breastfeeding that you would recommend, something that, might be helpful to them, somebody that's listening, and maybe some words that you'd like to say to them.
Yeah, sure. So if you are pregnant and you're planning to breastfeed, you would like to breastfeed, it's really important to educate yourself because a lot of what happens with breastfeeding with the hormones and your body changes have to happen early. So, you can't decide 2 weeks in that you want to breastfeed and necessarily find success with it, or you can't have lots of problems in the beginning and have success with, whatever your just definition of success is, but long-term breastfeeding. So make sure you're educating yourself early so you know what to expect and the things you need to do. And second, if you're choosing not to breastfeed, you don't want to breastfeed, or you start to try and it doesn't work well, it's okay. Like there's
Wow.
other ways to feed your baby. We live,
Right.
thankfully, in a country where we have availability of safe alternative to breastfeeding, and it's okay. It's not anything that we're trying to judge you on. A lot of moms will come back to me and feel shame that they didn't get it to work like I was instructing them to do, and there's no shame in it. There's no the weight of what you do as a mom is not measured in ounces of breast milk or time breastfeeding or any of that. So if it's interrupting your connection with the baby or your connection with your partner, or other things, and it's just not working, it's okay. So those are my two big things that I always, emphasize and make sure that people know.
I really appreciate you saying that, because hearing a physician and especially a pediatrician say that it's okay if the breastfeeding doesn't work, right, I think takes a lot of pressure off the mom. We know that when you're stressed, right, that can also affect breastfeeding. And so when you have that added pressure of, oh, am I going to be successful at this? Or, I'm going to feel shame, or, somebody's going to judge me because I'm not breastfeeding, right? That's all of those things will impact the breastfeeding itself. So I'm really happy that you said that there's no shame if you're not able to breastfeed, right? I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
really breastfeed my kids very long, and they're still, they're doing okay, So I think that, I think it's really important that what you said is helpful for new moms. So I appreciate that. And one more thing before we go, and I want to make sure, because it came to me, is that I'm wondering, do you tell new moms in terms of like supplements or what to eat or drink, or, also how to take care of their bodies while they're breastfeeding?
Yeah, so that is a huge subject. But
Well,
yeah, so for breastfeeding you need extra calories. So, if your goal postpartum is not to gain a bunch of extra weight, you want those calories to be quality calories. So, you need about 500 extra calories over your baseline amount of calories that you would normally eat. So making sure you're focusing on nutrient dense foods, protein is really important, fruits and vegetables, all of that good stuff. So not cookies and lactation cookies and all the things that you're like, oh, I'm free to eat whatever I want. You are, but eventually that catches up with you. And then just making sure that you're hydrating well. So you drink more water than you think you could possibly drink in a day, and then you drink some more. So hydration is a huge thing in breastfeeding. Breast milk is mostly made of water. So just making sure that your body is getting what it needs. I talk about breastfeeding as it's like a scavenger, right? So it's going to take everything and put it into the breast milk for the baby, and it leaves you with nothing. So making sure that you're taking your prenatal vitamins will help you to keep your body in shape and eating healthy. And then the only thing the baby really needs extra over breast milk itself is vitamin D. So in this country, we just don't get enough. We just don't have enough vitamin D because we just don't spend the time in the sun, because we're, worried about our skin, and very rightly so. So, either mom can take 6,400 international units of vitamin D, and that's been shown to get enough vitamin D to the baby, or you can supplement the baby with the 400 international units, which is usually just a little dropper of vitamin D every day. So those are the big things. And then this morning I did Instagram Live, and I talked with a postpartum exercise trainer. So you can catch that and learn more about what we talked about, returning to exercise and those kind of things postpartum. So.
Awesome. Well, gosh, this has been so helpful and so good. And I wish I had found you when I had my kids when they were small, because you would have been a godsend. So, well, thank you so much, Dr. Wadley, for coming in and giving us all these pearls of your knowledge regarding breastfeeding and intimacy and relationships and all of that. We really appreciate it, and appreciate what you do for your patients. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I am done here. And if you haven't done so already, please leave us a review. I would love to see those 5 stars. So please leave me a review, or also please share this episode. It's been real and really intimate. And remember, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. So please see your healthcare provider for any concerns you may have. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one coaching with Dr. Lodhi, please visit drsadaf.com. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast.